Meanwhile, Hong Kong has approved a contentious bill that makes it illegal to insult or mock the Chinese national anthem. It is a move that critics see as the latest sign of Beijing's attempt to tighten its grip on the city. The bill was passed with 41 lawmakers voting for it and just one against. Legislative debate was earlier suspended after pro-democracy lawmakers staged a protest, with one dropping a pot of pungent liquid in the chamber. Now, the ruling comes as people in Hong Kong are set to light candles across the city to commemorate the 1989 crackdown by Chinese troops in and around Tiananmen Square. The pro-democracy camp sees the Anthem Bill as an infringement of freedom of expression and the greater rights that residents of the semi-autonomous city have enjoyed compared to mainland China. The law undermines Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy and the freedom that has allowed the city to flourish. Under the bill, anyone found guilty of misusing or insulting the national anthem could be fined up to $6,450 and jailed for 3 years. Now, Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, had already made it clear last month that China will not back down on its proposed national security legislation in the region and expressed confidence in Hong Kong's development in the future.
咁當然我哋一行人嚟呢係表達我哋嘅意見啦，亦都會全面配合喺呢個立法工作進入去第二步，亦都有話全國人大常委會呢喺法律草擬嗰方面嘅工作。咁到日後按住呢個決定規定，特區政府呢係需要自己都建立一個健全嘅執行嘅機制啦，加強我哋嘅執法能力，同埋開展有關嘅國家安全嘅教育。
Last week, protests erupted again in Hong Kong after Beijing unveiled the new national security legislation. Now, many fear this year's Tiananmen Square commemoration might be Hong Kong's last, as the proposed imposition of national security laws by China on the semi-autonomous city would prevent and punish acts and activities that threaten national security. Local media reports that more than 3,000 riot officers have been deployed to enforce a ban against the vigil and other gatherings. But China has maintained that the security laws do not pose a threat to Hong Kong's autonomy and that the laws will have a narrow focus. Passed into law, the bill would lay down when the Chinese national anthem is to be played and the behavior related to it in Hong Kong. Even primary and secondary schools would be required to teach the song as well as its history and etiquette. Now, our correspondent, Richard Kimber, joins us from Hong Kong for more on this. Good evening to you, Richard. People are very concerned about the passing of these two laws, both the national security law and the national anthem law, as this goes even further to crushing any kind of dissent.
Well, that's right. As you can see around me, there is a huge effort by the pro-democracy campaigners to come out in defiance of a police ban on the attempts to commemorate the victims of the crackdown in Tiananmen Square. And that's all tied now to these two pieces of legislation that are passing through the legislature both in China and here in Hong Kong. First of all, today we have in Hong Kong a new Anthem Bill. That's basically a new piece of legislation that's banning all forms of dissent and criminalising forms of dissent towards the Chinese national anthem. Secondarily, we have a bigger piece of legislation coming from China, a national security law for Hong Kong, which is supposed, in the government's eyes, to ensure stability and prosperity for the future of Hong Kong and try and reduce any threats to national security. But people here, of course, also very concerned about that from a pro-democracy standpoint, because they see these two pieces of legislation on cracking down the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression that Hong Kong has long enjoyed. And that's basically coming together with what's happening right now here. We have a commemorative event for the victims of the Tiananmen Square protests in Beijing that was banned by police, but as you can see and hear around me, many people have come out anyway in defiance of that to make sure that their voices are still being heard.
So with the new bill on the national anthem, does this then mean that this is the end of the vigil of Tiananmen Square in the future?
Well, that's a very good question, and that's exactly the concern that many people who have come out here tonight have, because they feel that if this security bill is implemented, and it's due to be implemented by September of this year, then events like this commemorating sensitive issues in Chinese history will no longer be possible, because there will be too much pressure from Beijing on the Hong Kong government to allow these types of things to happen. So although none of this is clear yet, there's no ultimatum saying that this will no longer be allowed, and the government here has sought to reassure people on multiple levels that all these changes and these new laws will not affect the everyday life of your average Hong Konger. The concern is that, as you say, after next year, things like this just won't be possible anymore.
What do we make of Carrie Lam's support of this bill?
Well, she's in a very difficult position. The position of the Hong Kong chief executive is not a democratically elected position in Hong Kong in the truest sense of democracy. And as she said in her own words during her most difficult moments last year, she is, in her own words, a servant of two masters. She is trying to serve the people of Hong Kong, but of course also trying to serve the government in China. And so she has no option, and neither does the team of ministers around her, but to support these moves from China, whether they be the national security law or pressure for any other type of legislation. And if that makes her very unpopular here at home, she just has to deal with that, frankly, and there's nothing she can do. So it's an unenviable position, but it's one that, in the current structure of Hong Kong politics, cannot easily be resolved if somebody in her position defaults to just doing basically what she is instructed to do from China. And that is what is infuriating the pro-democracy campaigners here, because they feel like for as long as that continues, Hong Kong will only begin to have its freedoms eroded.
Richard, take us through some of the finer details. As an example, the $6,500 fine and also possibly 3 years in jail. These are very stringent punishments.
Well, these are the fairly strict terms that have been set out for these bills. I mean, how enforceable they are remains to be seen, and indeed whether or not the police here want to enforce them also remains to be seen, because certainly there is a very difficult situation also for the police here. They have at times last year been caught between the government and doing what some of them actually want to do, which is to protect society. So it's been quite an awkward situation for them too, and it's certainly not easy to maintain any kind of PR for their activities based on what happened last year. There's also, though it's important to add, a significant chunk of the Hong Kong population who are generally accepting, if not supportive, but some who are indeed supportive of these new bills from China and from the government, and they really, more than anything, just want all of what they think of as being this chaos, some of which you're seeing around me, just to finish, and they want to get back to their ordinary lives of carrying on in their ordinary way, and they don't feel particularly afraid of these laws or the punishments that come with them. They just feel like if everybody like them just got on with their life, Hong Kong would not need to go through this turmoil. So the only thing that's really certain at the moment, irrespective of these laws and how they might be enforced, is that society generally is becoming very torn by different feelings, different perspectives, and everything is becoming a lot more extreme than it probably would have been last year when these types of legislations were not being imposed.